Jesus reveals how to break the toxic cycle of anxiety that's controlling your life. Have you ever had the feeling that your mind has become a place where peace no longer enters? As if every day you wake up with a knot in your chest, an invisible restlessness that no one sees, but that silently dominates everything around you? It's like being trapped inside a dark room where the air seems heavier and heavier, where every thought turns into a monster, where even silence screams. You try to hide it, distract yourself, move on, but deep down you know you're living in a toxic cycle. A cycle that has a name: anxiety. What if I told you that this cycle is not only draining your energy, but pulling you away from what God really wants for your life? That it is eroding your faith, distorting your vision, and slowly killing your hope. Most people never realize this, but today they will. Because Jesus reveals something to you that can completely change the way you look at anxiety. A truth that has been ignored by many, but not anymore. Imagine yourself walking through a desert with your heart exhausted, your feet bleeding inside, looking for an answer. You've tried praying, but your mind won't stop. You've already sought help, but nothing seems enough. Have you ever wondered if Jesus really listens to you when anxiety is pressing? Have you ever wondered if he cares about the chaos inside you? What if I told you that not only does he listen to you, but he also left a map to guide you out of that place? A safe path, revealed in Scripture, hidden in plain sight. A powerful spiritual secret that can break this unhealthy cycle that has consumed you day after day. Yes, Jesus reveals to you how to break this cycle, and what he will show you here will change the way you see everything. You are not here by chance. Jesus brought you to this moment because something inside you still longs for deliverance. Even though the nights are long and the tears are silent, there is a voice that keeps calling your name. Today, that voice will reach you. Get ready. Take a deep breath and open your heart to this message. Because in the next few minutes, something sacred is going to happen. Something that is not just to comfort you, it is to free you. Jesus will show you the spiritual root of this anxiety. He will lead you, step by step, through forgotten stories, verses that shine like beacons in the darkness, and truths that will restore your soul. And in the end, you will no longer be the same. But now, before we begin, I want to ask you something. If this message has already started to touch your heart, if you feel that something profound is about to be revealed, then write in the comments, "I open my heart to hear Jesus," because this comment can be more than a text. It can be the beginning of your liberation. And if that word is already speaking to you, press the like button so that others can also be reached. Your gesture could be exactly what someone needs to come out of the darkness today. And now, get ready. Because Jesus reveals to you something that the world tried to hide, but that heaven always wanted you to know. You are not here by chance. It was no accident that you clicked on this video or decided to stay until now. There is something inside you, perhaps a silent cry, a weary sigh, or a held-back tear, that is asking for answers. And Jesus reveals to you that this is the exact moment when heaven bends down to hear you. Every word you will hear next is not just information. It's direction, it's help. It's an answer to pains that no one sees, but that your heart has carried for too long. And if you feel that this message is already beginning to touch something deep within you, I want to ask you, make space for Jesus to speak freely to your heart. Take a deep breath and allow yourself to feel. God can speak directly to you today. Yes, with you there on the other side of the screen, perhaps feeling alone, in silence, fighting thoughts that don't seem to let you rest. But today, something new can begin. You are part of something bigger. He is part of a people who are rising with faith in the midst of pain, who are rediscovering hope in the midst of anxiety, who are once again listening to the voice of Jesus as a safe direction in the midst of chaos. This message is not just to be heard, it is to be lived. So before we go deeper, I want to invite you to a moment of faith. If this word is already reaching you, write in the comments, "I trust in Jesus." This may seem simple, but your comment could be exactly the encouragement someone needs today. It may be an answer for another afflicted soul who will read it and realize they are not alone. And if this message speaks to you, press the like button so that more people can also be blessed. Because yes, liking this video is an act of evangelization. you become an active part of this mission, helping this word reach those who no longer see a way out. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. Be part of this community of faith, healing, and transformation. Jesus reveals something very important to you about your anxiety, and you need to hear it before leaving this video. Get ready, because what comes next could change everything. Imagine yourself in the middle of the rush of everyday life. The to-do list seems endless. The mind screams, even when the body is already exhausted. You try to sleep, but the thoughts won't turn off. You try to pray, but even prayer seems lost in a whirlwind of worries. It's as if you are constantly on alert, as if something is always about to happen, and it never does. This is the silent pain of a mind that never rests. It's tiredness that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul. It's the noise that's not outside, but inside. Martha knew exactly how that felt. She was running around, trying to serve, trying to control, trying to keep everything in order. On the outside, but inside, everything was in disarray. In that house in Bethany, where Jesus was received by two sisters, Mary and Martha, something much deeper than a simple reception took place. Mary sat at Jesus' feet, while Martha, restless, tried to make everything work. She did what she thought was right. After all, someone needed to maintain the house, right? Someone needed to take care of the food, the details, the hospitality. But Martha's soul screamed. And at that moment, Jesus interrupted her with a phrase that echoes in anxious hearts to this day. Martha, Martha, you are restless and worried about many things. Luke 10:41. How often is our anxiety disguised as responsibility? How often do we believe that being busy means being in control, when in reality we are being consumed inside? Martha did nothing wrong in human eyes. She wanted to please. I wanted to serve. But Jesus saw what no one else saw. An overloaded mind, an exhausted soul, a woman trying to support the world with her own hands. And maybe you're feeling this way too, as someone who never has peace, because there is always something pending, something that could go wrong, something that has not yet been resolved. Anxiety often doesn't come screaming. It infiltrates itself in the form of recurring thoughts, endless mental lists, and that subtle voice that whispers, "You have to manage. You have to control everything. If not you, who will?" But Jesus reveals something powerful to you today. It is not your role to carry everything. It is not your duty to control all the variables. It is not your calling to live in a state of constant alert, because there is something more important than doing. There is a place where your mind can rest, and that place is at his feet. Mary chose the best part, Jesus said, and that part would not be taken from her. The best part is not what you can do for Jesus, but the time you decide to be with him. The best part is not the control you try to maintain, but the surrender you allow yourself to live. The best part is not productivity, but presence. When Martha was confronted, it was not with judgment. It was with love. Jesus didn't condemn her. He called her back to the essentials. He awakened her from a state of mental exhaustion to a state of spiritual awareness. And today, that same voice calls you. Have you been so busy trying to survive that you've forgotten what it's like to simply live? Are you trying to control the external chaos to silence the internal chaos? What if Jesus is sitting in the room of your soul, waiting for you to stop running around on the outside so you can finally listen on the inside? What if all you need is not more effort but more presence? Martha represents our generation. Noisy on the outside, empty on the inside. Busy in appearance, anxious in essence. But Jesus reveals it to you. There is a way out. There is a new way of living. A mind quieted by trust. A heart stabilized by surrender. A soul healed by presence. And maybe you've never heard it this way, but Jesus doesn't just want your service. He wants you. He wants your attention, your silence, your pause. Because it is in the silence that he whispers. It is in the pause that he heals. It is in the presence that he transforms. It's not about deserving that rest. It's about accepting it. Martha felt she needed to earn Jesus' approval. But Maria understood that all she had to do was sit down and listen. Today, that choice is before you too. Do you continue to struggle with a restless mind, trying to resolve what will never be in your control? Or do you choose to sit at the feet of the Prince of Peace? And before continuing, take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this message. Imagine Jesus looking you in the eye and saying, "You are troubled about many things, but only one is necessary. What you need now is not yet another plan. It's a surrender. What you need is not more control, it's trustworthy." And perhaps this seems strange. After all, you learned that rest is for later, when everything is resolved. But Jesus reveals it to you. True peace begins now, when you decide to stop fighting your own mind and start trusting Him. If this message is touching your heart, tell us in the comments, "I trust in Jesus." Your statement of faith may be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Your comment is not just a response. It is a seed of healing that can blossom in other hearts. But something more powerful is about to be revealed. Because if the anxious mind is the first battlefield, the fear of tomorrow is the giant that stops our steps before we even start walking. And what you're about to discover will change the way you see everything. There is a type of fear that cannot be shouted. He lives in silence, but screams inside. It's the one that whispers as you try to plan for tomorrow. The fear that tightens your chest when you think about what could happen to your children, with the bills, with the future that you cannot control. It is a fear that has no form, but has weight. A fear that hides behind thoughts like, what if I can't handle it? What if everything goes wrong? What if God doesn't do anything? This fear has a name, anxiety, and it feeds on the attempt to predict tomorrow. But Jesus reveals to you, tomorrow was never your place of residence. Your place is here, not today, not now, in the desert of life, where the only certainty is that God is walking with you, even when everything seems uncertain. The people of Israel knew this type of anxiety well. After leaving Egypt, freed by the powerful hand of the Lord, they found themselves facing a new enemy, time. A time that seemed to never pass. A desert that seemed to have no end. And with each new day, the same doubt arose. What about tomorrow? Will we have water? Will we have bread? Are we going to die here? Even with manna falling from the sky every morning, even with the cloud guiding by day and the fire illuminating at night, hearts remained restless. Because the desert doesn't just expose geography, it reveals what's inside the soul. Do not be anxious about anything. Philippians 4:6. This is how Paul begins one of the most confronting and liberating verses in the Word. But how can we not be anxious if everything around us is uncertain? How can we not worry if we don't know what's coming? How can we trust if the desert seems endless? The secret lies precisely in what Jesus reveals to you now. Anxiety arises when you try to live tomorrow without the presence of God. It is the fruit of a heart that, even as a believer, still wants to hold the helm of the boat. It is the attempt to predict the unpredictable, to control the uncontrollable, to anticipate what only God can prepare. Have you ever seen yourself like this? Waking up with a heavy heart before the day even begins? Trying to predict scenarios that don't even exist yet? Perhaps you are right now worried about an answer that hasn't arrived, a door that hasn't yet opened, a future that seems frighteningly vague. And this is where the desert becomes symbolic, because it is the place where you discover that all you have is God, and at the same time, all you need is Him. The people of Israel in the desert could only get the manna they needed for one day. If they tried to save it for another day, it would rot. Why? Because God was teaching something much deeper than a food system. He was teaching trust. He was saying, I am enough today, and tomorrow I will be enough again. Anxiety is, at its core, a struggle of faith. That's when the heart says, what if God doesn't come tomorrow? But Jesus reveals to you, He is the God of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He doesn't change, and He doesn't fail. Maybe you've learned to always live one step ahead trying to anticipate everything, but it wore you down. It took away your peace. It trapped you in a constant state of tension. Today, this prison can be broken. Because the gospel is not an invitation to control life. It is an invitation to trust those who have already written it completely. You don't need to carry what hasn't happened yet. You don't need to suffer for scenarios that didn't even arrive. You don't have to live in tomorrow. When Jesus is here, now, present, take a deep breath. Imagine the people of Israel waking up to fresh manna on the land. No effort, no despair. Provision only. Imagine God saying to you, no need to run. I'm already here. What you need is not guarantees. It's trustworthy. And trust is built one day at a time. There is no magic formula to eliminate anxiety, but there is a powerful truth that can silence your voice. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do it all. Psalms 37:5. And if you have been paralyzed because of tomorrow, today Jesus calls you to return to the now, living this moment, accepting today's manna, resting in today's care, because He is taking care of everything, even when you don't see it, even when the path seems sterile, even when the answer seems to be delayed, even when fear whispers to your mind. Jesus reveals to you, do not be anxious about anything. This is not a suggestion. It is a promise disguised as a command, because He knows that if you trust, peace will come. The peace that passes all understanding. The peace that guards your mind and your heart. The peace that only He can give. If this word is reaching you, comment right now. Jesus is my livelihood. Your comment is more than a sentence. It's an act of faith, and it could be the confirmation that someone else needed to read today to not give up. Write, share, be an active part of what God is doing right now. You are not alone on this journey. There is a cloud of witnesses walking with you, and there is a God who never fails to send the manna needed, one day at a time. And maybe you're asking yourself, but if I stop worrying, who will take care of everything? The answer is simple but profound. God. He always took care, and He will always take care. Jesus reveals to you, faith is not the absence of fear, it is the presence of trust. And today, He is restoring that within you. But there is still something more, something that we often confuse with virtue, but which in fact feeds our cycle of anxiety without us realizing it. What comes next could change the way you see everything. Sometimes the body continues, but the soul has stopped for days. You wake up, do your tasks, answer messages, smile, try to maintain control, but inside, you are exhausted, and no one notices, because everything you do looks good. It feels right. You are the type of person who takes care of everything, that holds the house's emotions, that avoids falling apart so as not to worry others, that serves, helps, plans, resolves. But sometimes what you call responsibility is actually anxiety in disguise, and it has consumed you in a way that no one sees. But Jesus reveals to you, even what seems noble can be draining your soul if it's not coming from the right place. Elijah, the prophet who defied kings, faced false gods, and called for fire from heaven, experienced this type of exhaustion. After one of the most powerful moments of his ministry, when he prayed and fire descended on the sodden altar, he was overcome with paralyzing fear. Jezebel threatened his life, and Elijah, instead of facing it, fled. He ran into the desert, isolated himself from everyone, and asked God to die. Yes, the man who lived under the supernatural gave himself up to despair. And there, under a juniper tree, he said a prayer that echoes in tired hearts. Enough. Enough is enough. Take my life. 1 Kings 19:4. Have you ever felt this way? Too tired to continue, but also without the strength to stop? Elijah wasn't just afraid. He was exhausted emotionally, spiritually, physically, and this happens more often than we think. What seems like just a rough patch is sometimes an unnamed internal breakdown. What seems like just too much to do is actually an overwhelmed soul trying to survive. And here is the secret that Jesus reveals to you at this moment. Even the strong crumble when they try to live by their own strength. Elijah was a man of faith, but he forgot that faith also means knowing how to rest. That spirituality also means knowing how to stop. That God did not call us to live on constant alert, but to know when it is time to lie down in the shade, eat, and start over. In the middle of the desert, God does not appear with thunder or with reproaches. He sends an angel with a meal. And he says, "Get up and eat, because the journey will be very long." 1 Kings 19:7. He does not invalidate Elijah's pain. Don't call him weak. He does not accuse him of a lack of faith. He feeds him. He takes care. He sustains. And this is the Jesus who meets you today too. Not with demands, but with compassion. Not with weight, but with provision. He knows you don't need more chores. You need food for your soul. You need to sleep without guilt. Breathe slowly. Stop without fear. Because resting is also spiritual. Pausing is also faith. Maybe you have become addicted to doing, not because you love what you do, but because you feel that if you stop, everything will fall apart. Maybe you're stuck in a cycle of toxic productivity, where your worth is tied to how much you accomplish. But Jesus reveals to you, what defines you is not how much you produce, but how much you trust. And sometimes trust means knowing how to stop. It's recognizing that the world keeps turning even when you pause, that God continues to act even when you are not in action, that He is enough even when you are silent. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes and imagine Jesus looking at you tenderly saying, "You have done so much, but now, just sit down, just rest. I am here." This is not weakness, it is spiritual maturity. It's recognizing that your soul is worth more than any task, that your emotional health matters, that your spirituality is not measured by how much you can handle, but by how much you know how to surrender. Elijah thought everything was over, but there, in the desert, the most profound process of restoring his life began. And it may be that now, in your desert, Jesus is also starting something new within you. If this message is reaching you in the midst of your tiredness, comment right now, "Jesus, I need rest." Declare this with courage. You no longer have to carry this weight alone. Your comment might be a whisper of relief that another weary soul needs to read right now. And if that word touched your pain in a special way, press the like button. This simple gesture helps this message reach more people who are drowning in silence, trying to keep it all together. While inside they are falling apart, your click can be a rescue for those who have already lost their strength. And that takes us to something even deeper, because there are moments when it's not just tiredness or fear of tomorrow. It is the feeling that God is silent, that the faith that once strengthened you now seems fragile in the face of the storm. And what happens next could change the way you see everything. Have you ever had a time when it feels like God is silent? It's not that you stopped believing, but somehow the faith that was once an anchor now seems to float, unstable, almost fragile. Prayer still leaves your lips, but your heart no longer feels the same. It's like being in a boat, surrounded by turbulent waters and realizing that, even with Jesus there, fear still screams. The storm is still scary, and faith, which should keep you firm, now seems too small to sustain everything. Jesus reveals to you that even the closest disciples felt this, and it was exactly in the middle of a real storm, on the high seas, that a profound truth was revealed. The scene is simple but full of tension. Jesus is with his disciples in a boat. The sea is choppy. The wind blows violently. The waves threaten to overturn everything. And the most disturbing detail is this: Jesus is sleeping. Yes, in the midst of chaos, Jesus sleeps. And the disciples, men accustomed to the sea, despair. They wake up the master and, with an accusatory tone, ask, "Do you not care if we perish?" Mark 4:38. The question carries the anguish that many of us have felt. God, do you see what I'm going through? Do you really care about me? Why are you silent when everything is falling apart? Jesus gets up. Look at the sea. Order him to calm down. And then he turns to the disciples and asks, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Mark 4:40. Note, he does not reject them. Don't abandon them. He calms the sea first, then confronts the heart. Because the storm outside only reveals the storm inside. And perhaps you are experiencing something similar. Perhaps you thought that the presence of Jesus would guarantee the absence of problems. But Jesus reveals a profound truth to you. His presence does not stop the storm, but it guarantees that you will not sink into it. This story is a mirror, because often we, like the disciples, want to see God move first and then believe. But faith is not a reaction to the miracle. Faith is conviction before calm, and anxiety sets in when fear becomes louder than our faith, when the wind screams louder than the voice of God, when scenarios distract us from the promise. Have you ever felt this way? Trying to keep faith alive, but every day it seems more distant from reality. The heart wants to trust, but the mind has already drowned in negative thoughts, in panic, in uncertainty. And then you ask yourself, is God still with me? Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to imagine Jesus in that boat, calmly rising in the midst of the chaos. He doesn't scream. He does not despair. He just speaks with authority. Be still. Be silent. And the sea obeys. The wind obeys. everything calms down, this is not just a historical account. It's a living message. Jesus reveals to you that he continues to calm storms today. And sometimes the first storm he wants to calm is the one inside you. You are not being weak because you are afraid. But today, you are being invited to trust even in silence, to believe even when he seems to be sleeping. Because deep down, what fear tries to steal from you is not external peace, but the certainty that he is in the boat. And he is. All the time, even when it seems like you're not doing anything. He's watching, you're listening, it's acting. And when the time is right, he will rise, and nothing can resist his voice. If this word is crossing your heart like a ray of truth in the middle of your dark nights, comment now, Jesus is in my boat. Write it down as a leap of faith. Maybe you are facing winds that no one sees. But Jesus is with you, even if in silence, and your statement could be the breath of hope that someone on the other side also needs. Your comment carries more power than you realize, but there is still something that needs to be confronted. Something that, for many, is one of the biggest causes of anxiety. When prayer doesn't seem to work. When you pray and nothing changes. When you cry out and the sky seems closed. What happens next may completely change the way you understand God's silence. There is a pain that is not loud, but eats away inside. Praying and not seeing anything change. It's the feeling of talking to the closed sky, of doing everything right, fasting, crying out, declaring, believing, and still feeling like nothing happens. God's silence can seem more painful than the storm itself, because when you are at war but you feel God responding, there is strength. But when you are fighting and the sky seems indifferent, the heart falls. Jesus reveals to you today that even he, the Son of God himself, went through this, and not just for an instant, but in one of the most crucial moments in human history, a pain that can only be understood by those who have prayed on their knees and gotten up without an answer. Gethsemane was not just a garden, it was a silent battlefield, where Jesus' soul was crushed before his body was nailed to the cross. There, he turned away from the disciples and, overcome by mortal anguish, prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours, be done." Luke 22:42. It was a sincere prayer, intense, painful. It was the cry of someone who knew what lay ahead and yet did not run away. But here's the point you may never have stopped to consider. God the Father did not remove the cup. The answer was silence, and yet Jesus remained. Because true prayer is not the attempt to change God's will. It's the place where you learn to submit to it, even when it hurts. Have you ever been to this place? He prayed for deliverance, but the situation got worse. He asked for healing, but the pain increased. He cried out for an answer, and everything was silent. And then, little by little, his heart was invaded by a subtle but dangerous thought. Did God hear me? Was my faith not enough? Did I do something wrong? Jesus reveals it to you now. The absence of an immediate response is not the absence of presence. The Father was there all the time, observing, sustaining, strengthening. Sometimes God doesn't respond with what you want. He responds with what you need to endure what comes. In Gethsemane, an angel was sent to strengthen Jesus, not to free him from the cross, but to enable him to face it. And perhaps you are exactly at that point, wanting to be delivered, but being called to be strengthened. Praying is not about manipulating the sky. It's about realigning the heart, about transforming pain into delivery, about stopping trying to control what only God can lead. Jesus reveals to you that the most powerful prayer is not the one that changes circumstances. It is the one that changes you. The toxic cycle of spiritual anxiety is born when you pray, hoping that everything will be resolved quickly, and get frustrated when it doesn't happen. But the maturity of faith is learning that God is not moved by the pressure of time, but by the perfection of purpose. Gethsemane was necessary. The cross was inevitable. But the resurrection was glorious. And the same happens with you. God may not be delivering you from pain right now because he is using this time to reveal who you are in him, to form in you a faith that does not depend on answers, but on presence. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine Jesus in the garden, with his face to the ground, sweating drops of blood, alone, but surrendered. Imagine him looking up at the sky in silence, and yet saying, "Thy will be done." This is the kind of faith that cannot be shaken. And this faith is being generated within you. Maybe you don't realize it now. Maybe you're still waiting for a response that hasn't arrived, but Jesus reveals to you, if you continue praying, even in silence, you have already won. If this word is deeply touching something that you are living in secret, write now in the comments, "I trust even in silence." Your comment is not a loose sentence. It is a confession of faith that can inspire others who are also praying and waiting. And if this message brought clarity and hope to your heart, press the like button. This small act can bring this word to thousands of people who today are almost giving up on praying. And now, have you ever noticed how cruel your thoughts become when you are anxious? How does your mind start to sabotage you? How even your faith begins to be questioned by inner voices that say, "You will never change. You are alone. You are not strong enough." What if I told you that anxiety doesn't always start with what happens outside, but with what you allow to happen inside? What comes next will reveal a battle that no one sees, but that is influencing everything within you. What if the greatest enemy of your peace is not outside, but within you? What if, without realizing it, you are hurting yourself with your own thoughts, feeding the cycle of anxiety every day with voices you never questioned? Jesus reveals to you that there is a silent war being waged inside many minds. And the enemy sometimes doesn't scream. He whispers. It masquerades as logic, as realism, even as spiritual wisdom. But, in reality, they are mental arrows coated with apparent prudence, launched to keep you away from the truth. And this mental trap has deceived even the righteous. Job was one of them. Imagine yourself in his place, righteous, faithful, obedient, but suddenly, everything falls apart. In a matter of days, he loses his children, his health, his possessions, the respect of his wife, the support of his friends. But what hurt him most were not the external losses. That's what started to echo inside him. Questions that were born out of pain, but turned into internal accusation. What did I do wrong? Has God turned away from me? Maybe I'm being punished. And then advice appears. Those that arrive with an air of spirituality, but with words that sink even deeper. Friends who, instead of consoling, condemn. Who say, maybe you deserve this. This is the kind of emotional toxicity that settles in the mind and takes root. In Job 38:2, God finally breaks the silence with a question that exposes the root of the problem. Who is this that obscures my counsel with words without knowledge? Jesus reveals to you here that not every phrase that sounds pious is true. Not every belief you were taught is aligned with the Father's heart. It's where distorted thoughts are repeated so much that they seem certain, but they are not. These are mental prisons that disguise self-sabotage as humility. And as long as you believe them, anxiety grows. Maybe you've already said to yourself, "That's just the way I am. I'll never change. I'm not as strong as others." But who taught you that? Where did these words come from? Jesus reveals to you, there is a brutal difference between what you think about yourself and what God thinks about you. And as long as you continue to feed on thoughts not filtered by the Word, you will remain trapped in the toxic cycle of anxiety. Not because the world is falling apart, but because your mind is programmed to expect the worst even when nothing has happened yet. Job's story shows that God's silence is not abandonment. It is preparation for the truth. When God speaks, he does not explain suffering. It reveals how limited the human mind is in the face of divine sovereignty. Job does not receive an answer to his pain. He receives a revelation that changes everything. God is greater. He's good. He is fair, even when we don't understand. And anxiety begins to lose its power when you decide to stop building arguments based on pain and start trusting God's character, not your circumstances. Perhaps now you are fighting exactly that war. Perhaps your greatest fatigue is not physical, but mental. You are exhausted from fighting thoughts that humiliate you, that paralyze you, that make you believe that you are a mistake waiting to happen. But Jesus reveals it to you. This is not your identity. It is an internal noise that needs to be silenced by the truth. And the truth is, you are loved, you are seen, you are heard, and you are called to think like a child, not a victim. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this message. Close your eyes for a moment and think. What thoughts have been repeating in your mind over the last few days? Do they reflect the truth of the Word or fear of the future? Do they bring you closer to God or make you run away from Him? Jesus reveals to you that breaking the cycle of anxiety begins with a choice. Stop believing everything that goes through your head and start filtering your thoughts for eternity. If this message is revealing a battlefield that no one sees, but that is bleeding inside you, write in the comments, "Jesus, renew my mind." Your comment could be the healing bridge for someone who is hearing the same destructive thoughts that you overcame. And share this word with someone who lives this inner war in silence. You can be the angel God is sending to strengthen someone today. But there is another type of anxiety that you may not have even noticed. That which infiltrates relationships, that turns love into demand, care into control, affection into distrust. And here comes one of the most urgent truths you need to hear. Anxiety doesn't just affect you. It affects those you love too. What's coming will touch areas that you may have been trying to hide for years. Sometimes anxiety doesn't scream inside the mind. It infiltrates words, gestures, silences, and without you realizing it, it begins to destroy what you most wanted to protect, your relationships. Jesus reveals to you that anxiety is sneaky. She doesn't present herself as a villain, but as a justification. It's because I care too much. It's because I want the best. It's because I'm afraid of losing. But behind these phrases lives a heart that is struggling to hide a deep fear. The fear that God will forget, that it will take too long, that He will fail. And it is in this fear that we begin to make decisions that do not come from faith, but from desperation. Sarah knew what to expect. Years have passed since God promised Abraham, "You will be the father of a great nation." But time passed. The youth has gone. The body has aged, and with it, hope. This is where anxiety turns into hasty action. Sarah, tired of waiting, proposed something that seemed rational, that Abraham should have a son with the servant, Hagar. In the eyes of the world, a strategic solution. In God's eyes, an anxious interference in the perfect plan. And the result was chaos. Jesus reveals to you that when anxiety takes control, it makes us take costly shortcuts. Have you ever caught yourself doing exactly this? Trying to force doors that God has not yet opened? Trying to resolve situations based on the fear that no one will take care of it for me? Anxiety, when left untreated, becomes a blurred lens that distorts love into distrust, protection into control, communication into demand. And that's how relationships burn out, not because there is a lack of love, but because the fear has not been addressed. Jesus reveals to you, where anxiety settles, love withdraws. The most painful thing about this story is not Sarah's mistake, but the silence that came after. The silence between her and Abraham. The distance between her and Hagar. The pain of seeing what was supposed to be a blessing turn into conflict. And yet even after all this, God remained faithful. The Son of Promise has come. But now, there were two seeds growing. One of faith, one of anxiety. One would generate a legacy. The other, conflict. The same thing happens in our relationships today. There are attitudes that are born from peace, and others that are born from panic. The question is, which one is governing your decisions? Do you feel that your anxiety has affected those you love? That your need to control is suffocating bonds? That you are reacting more out of insecurity than wisdom? Jesus reveals something profoundly liberating to you. You don't have to carry the weight of supporting what you love alone. It is not your effort that maintains a healthy relationship. It is the presence of God at the center. When you surrender to the Father's timing and will, you liberate not only yourself, but also those around you. Because controlling everything is exhausting, but trusting is liberating. Take a deep breath now. Think about the conversations you've had over the past few days. Was there love or tension, care or collection, affection or frustration? Jesus reveals to you that the anxiety you feel is not a sign of weakness. It is an invitation to surrender. When you turn your relationships over to God, something begins to change. You stop trying to be the Savior and let the true Savior restore, lead, heal. And maybe today you're living with someone who is also anxious. And this creates a toxic cycle of reaction upon reaction. But someone needs to break this pattern. Someone needs to stop yelling and start praying. Someone needs to stop running away. and start trusting. How about starting with you? Don't wait for someone else to change. Jesus reveals to you that when you change the source from which you seek security, everything around you begins to be transformed. If this word spoke to you directly, if you realize that anxiety has stolen your peace and undermined your bonds, write in the comments, "Jesus, heal my relationships." Your comment could be the seed of restoration for someone else who is experiencing the same pain but hasn't yet had the courage to admit it. And here comes one of the hardest truths to face. Anxiety feeds on a subtle lie, the idea that you are in control. But what if control is exactly what is preventing you from experiencing God's supernatural? What if the obsession with predicting, calculating, and protecting is suffocating the faith you are asking so much to grow? What you're about to discover could change the way you view your own faith. But that's not all. There is an even more silent, more disguised emotional trap that traps hearts without the person realizing it. It's not the fear of tomorrow, nor the tiredness of today. It's the illusion of total control, the desperate desire to predict, avoid, anticipate, and solve everything alone. Jesus reveals to you, this anxiety hidden behind control is one of the most toxic emotional prisons that the enemy builds. Pedro experienced this intensely. The same Peter who walked on water, the same one who declared, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," but also the same one that sank. Because when the wind became too strong, when the sea stopped obeying his faith and began to shake his feet with visible threats, Peter looked away. He stopped looking at Jesus and looked at what he couldn't control. That's where everything changed. Matthew 14:30 clearly records, "But when he saw the force of the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.'" This verse carries a profound truth. It was not the wind that made Peter sink. It was his focus. Jesus reveals to you that your anxiety is not born from the circumstance itself, but from the way you look at it. The wind was always there. But as he looked at Jesus, he walked on the water. Fear only entered when the focus shifted. How many times have you felt this way? Walking well, living your faith, trusting, until something takes you off track. Bad news. A delay. A detail you can't control. And suddenly everything collapses inside you. Your body goes on alert. Your mind races. Your heart is heavy. You want to hold on to everything. Work, family, bills, feelings. But you feel like something is slipping away. Jesus reveals to you, you are not called to control the sea. You are called to trust him who walks in it. Control anxiety arises from the belief that if you don't make everything work out, everything will go wrong. But that is too heavy a burden for a human heart to carry. Pedro didn't sink because he failed. He sank because he forgot that he was not the one sustaining that miracle. And that speaks directly to your soul today. It is not your strength that sustains your house. It's not your effort that holds your relationship together. It's not your planning that prevents pain. It is the presence of Jesus. Maybe today you are exhausted, not physically, but inside, because you try to keep all the plates spinning in the air, and you feel like at any moment one is going to fall. But Jesus reveals something liberating to you. Control is not a sign of maturity. Delivery is. Spiritual maturity is not knowing what to do about everything. It's knowing who to trust when everything seems to get out of control. It's recognizing, Jesus, I can't do it, but you can. And there is a detail in this story that few realize. Pedro began to sink, but he did not drown. This is powerful, because even when you miss the mark, even when anxiety pulls you down, Jesus is close enough to reach out. The Bible says, "And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him." Matthew 14:31. It was not after Peter repented. It wasn't after a long prayer. It was at the moment of pain, in the moment of weakness. This reveals something that you may need to hear urgently today. God does not wait for you to calm down to help you. He gets into chaos with you. If this word spoke to you personally, if you feel like you've been trying to control everything but sinking inside, write in the comments, "Jesus, take the weight off my control." Yes, write it as a declaration, as a cry, because your comment could be the encouragement another soul needs to let go of the oars and trust. And remember, it's not a sign of weakness to recognize that you're overwhelmed. It is a sign of spiritual maturity to ask for help from the only one who never loses control. Jesus. And now, close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel this presence that reaches you even in the middle of the wind. Even when everything seems to get out of hand, Jesus reveals to you, you no longer need to fight with the sea. You just need to look at him again. But what if I told you there was something even scarier than losing control? What if the real danger wasn't what you couldn't predict, but what you'd become accustomed to accepting as normal? Because anxiety, when not confronted, becomes a way of life. What you're about to discover will change the way you see everything. There is an anxiety more subtle, more dangerous, and even more silent than fear of the future or emotional exhaustion. It's the one that dresses up as competence. It disguises itself as responsibility, and it hides behind a word that, on the outside, seems noble, but inside, it consumes you. Control. Jesus reveals to you that this is one of the most destructive emotional traps, not because it destroys you all at once, but because it consumes you little by little. While you believe you are just doing what needs to be done, but whoever lives trying to control everything will eventually lose control of themselves. That's what happened to Pedro that night. The same Peter who dared to ask for something impossible. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. It was the answer Pedro expected. He had enough faith to get out of the boat, but he was unable to sustain his pace when the winds grew stronger. Matthew 14:30 describes the moment with brutal clarity. But when he saw the force of the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Note the order of actions. He walked while looking at Jesus, but it sank. At the exact moment, he began to notice what he couldn't control. This speaks directly to those who are anxious to anticipate problems, predict failures, and avoid pain. Jesus reveals something to you that no one has ever told you. Excessive control is often the soul's attempt to compensate for a wounded faith. It's not about planning. It's about fear. A fear so deep that something will go wrong, that you try to prevent even what is not your responsibility. How many times have you lived like this? Thinking about everything that could go wrong, trying to prevent it, resolve it before it happens. Take the place of God in your own life? It's exhausting. It's lonely. And worse, it's useless. Pedro realized this the moment he felt the wind. He saw that there was no way to stop the storm. But he also discovered something infinitely more important. He didn't need to, because even when everything around seemed threatening, Jesus was there. And all it took was a sincere cry for him to reach out. You no longer have to drown trying to keep everything under control. You no longer need to live enslaved by scenarios that only exist in your mind. Jesus reveals to you that total control is an illusion, but his presence is a certainty, and that's what sustains you. Pedro did not sink due to lack of love, not for lack of effort. He sank because he looked to the side, because he took his eyes off the only one who really supported his steps. This also happens to you when, in the midst of chaos, your attention goes to what can destroy you instead of the one who can sustain you. And there is something even deeper here. Jesus did not let Peter drown, even with wavering faith. Even with fear screaming louder than courage, the Bible says that Jesus immediately stretched out his hand. He didn't take long. He didn't make Peter beg. He did not demand explanations. He just helped, because God's love does not depend on the firmness of your faith, but on the fidelity of his heart. If you identify with this, if you are tired of trying to control everything, if you feel like you are sinking even though you are doing everything right, write in the comments, Jesus, I give up control. Teach me to trust. This phrase can be the first step towards liberation, an invitation for Jesus to return to being the center of your focus. And maybe someone will read your comment and realize that they also need to let go of the oars. Because control anxiety isn't resolved with force, it's cured with surrender. Jesus reveals to you that faith is not walking when everything is calm. Just keep walking when the wind picks up. Not because you have power over the storm, but because you know who is in it with you. And even if you've sunk before, he's still there, with his hand outstretched, ready to lift you up again. Because you are not a failure, because you are afraid. You're just tired of trying to carry what you weren't called to carry. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this presence. She is there now, even in the middle of your fight, even in the midst of chaos. Jesus reveals to you what is out of your control is still in his hands. And that's enough. But that's not all. What if the biggest danger isn't in what you try to control, but in what you've learned to accept as normal? What if the anxiety that gnaws at you today has already become part of your routine without you realizing it? What comes next will confront you deeply, because Jesus reveals to you that living anxiously is not living, it's surviving. And you weren't called to do that. Perhaps the scariest thing about anxiety is not the storm it causes, but the silence with which it settles, slowly, covertly, until it becomes part of you. And what was an exception became a routine. What was a symptom became an identity. And without realizing it, you start calling personality what is actually untreated emotional pain. Jesus reveals to you that one of the enemy's greatest strategies is to convince you that living in anxiety is normal, that having a loaded soul is being an adult, that living with a tight chest is just part of modern life. But what if this is all a lie? What if the anxiety that has been with you for so long is an emotional prison disguised as a habit? This is the reality that explodes before us when we encounter the story of the paralytic of Bethesda, someone who wasn't born into that condition, but stayed in it long enough to believe there was no other way out. The Bible says he was sick for 38 years. 38? And the most impressive? He was there, next to the pool, the place where many went to be healed. He saw people arriving and leaving restored. But he remained, property, static. And when Jesus finds him, the question he asks seems strange at first. Do you want to be healed? Why would Jesus ask that of someone who was sick? Because there is a brutal difference between wanting a cure and getting used to the pain, between crying out for change and accommodating suffering. The paralytic responded with an automatic speech. "Sir, I have no one to put me in the tank when the water is disturbed." A phrase that reveals what anxiety does to the human mind. It creates such logical justifications that they end up imprisoning you emotionally. He didn't answer yes. He didn't answer no. He explained his emotional paralysis with facts. But Jesus reveals to you that facts will never have more weight than faith when heaven decides to intervene. And maybe you are exactly like that, trapped in a toxic cycle of anxiety that has already become your lifestyle. "I have no one" became his motto. "I've tried before" has become your barrier. "This isn't for me" stops you from getting up. But Jesus is there now, before you, and the question keeps echoing. Do you want to be healed? And it's not just about a healed body. This is a freed soul, from a heart detoxified from fear, of a mind restored from restlessness, of a faith reactivated by presence. And here comes the most impressive part of this story. Jesus didn't wait for the man to get up on his own. It did not require superhuman effort. He did not ask for proof of faith. He just declared, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." Simple, direct, powerful. Because when the word of Jesus enters a mind imprisoned by anxiety, what was paralyzed rises. What was normal for the world becomes a miracle before God. Maybe you've spent so much time living in anxiety that you wouldn't even recognize yourself at peace anymore. Maybe your healing tank is full of obstacles. But Jesus reveals to you that you don't need a ladder nor a push. You just need his voice. Because when he speaks, even the impossible obeys. And the toxic cycle of anxiety, which has imprisoned you emotionally, spiritually, and even physically, is broken at the root. If this message touched a deep part of your story, if you feel stuck in something that should have already been overcome, write in the comments, "Jesus, I want to be healed," not as a ritual, but as a sincere cry. This phrase could be the spark that ignites liberation, and it could be the cry that another heart needed to read today to not give up. Remember, your comment could be the encouragement someone needs right now. Jesus reveals to you that you were not created to survive emotionally. It was created to live free, light, whole. Anxiety is not part of your identity. Restlessness is not your destiny. And if you accept this healing, even without understanding all the processes, it will transform not only your mind, but your path. Take a deep breath now and say in faith, "I want to be healed." And you will realize that what seemed impossible has already begun to be restored. Because when Jesus enters the scene, not even wasted time is an obstacle. 38 years were broken with one sentence. And maybe everything that holds you back today is just waiting for an answer. but there is still a burden that you have carried as if it were yours, but never was. And the more you try to endure alone, the closer you come to collapsing inside. What you're about to hear could be the beginning of an emotional break you never imagined possible. And this next revelation will completely change the way you deal with the weight of life. What if I told you that the biggest mistake you make every day is carrying a burden that was never yours? Something that Jesus has already offered you to exchange, but you insist on enduring. Out of pride? Out of habit? Or because deep down you believe you need to pay for something you did? Jesus reveals to you that anxiety grows stronger when you accept emotional responsibilities that do not belong to you. And, without realizing it, your mind becomes a deposit of weights. Past guilt, present pressure, future demands. All of this adds up until the heart screams in silence, "I can't take it anymore." It was exactly this pain that Jesus faced head-on when he said one of the most comforting and most ignored phrases in the entire Bible. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Read that again, but now, let each word sink in where the anxiety has been living. Jesus did not say, "Come to me, all you who are perfect," not everyone who has already solved their problems. He said, "Tired, overloaded." This call is for those who have tried everything, for those who are on the verge of collapse, for those who have nowhere else to hide their pain, for those who, even between smiles and routines, feel an invisible knot tightening inside. Jesus was speaking to a people drowning in ritual, surrounded by religious impositions, and crushed by a system that said, "You must do more, be more, prove more." Doesn't that sound like us today? The culture of performance, the dictatorship of success, the constant comparison. It all screams that you need to carry more and more. And the more you try to cope, the more your chest tightens. But the mind becomes fragmented. But the body gets sick. Anxiety isn't just a chemical problem. It's often a spiritual sign that you're trying to be your own savior. But Jesus reveals it to you. The relief you are looking for is not in techniques, nor in absolute control. It's in exchange. Change the burden. Change the weight. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart." He does not leave you empty. He relieves you of a burden to give you direction, because his yoke is light, but it is still a yoke, a purpose, a new way of walking. How often does your anxiety come from the fear of disappointing someone? From the terror of making mistakes? The shame of failing again? You take the world on your back as if it were your obligation to save everyone, take care of everything, carry everything in silence. And Jesus whispers, "This burden is not yours. Let go." But letting go seems dangerous, doesn't it? It seems irresponsible. It looks like weakness. But what if, in fact, letting go is the greatest act of faith? Imagine someone with their hands so full of heavy bags that they can't hold a gift. That's you with the anxiety. Your hands are busy with what sinks you. That's why you can't receive what heals you. But Jesus does not force. He invites, and every invitation demands a response. Maybe you need to pause everything now and reflect. What burden are you carrying that is not yours? What have you assumed, emotionally, that is draining your life, your faith, your balance? Jesus reveals to you that you were called to walk, not to crawl, to live in lightness, even in the midst of pain. Because the world may demand more and more from you, but Jesus offers you rest. And here comes the most disruptive moment. This rest is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of Jesus. It's not the end of the fight. It's peace within war. It's laying your head on the pillow and sleeping, even with bills to pay, even with unresolved diagnoses, even with doubts along the way, because you know that you are no longer carrying everything alone. If this word is confronting you in the heaviest place in your soul, I want to invite you to an act of spiritual courage. Comment now, "Jesus, I release this burden." It may seem simple, but it is powerful. Because when you declare this, you activate the surrender process. You name what suffocates you and deliver it. And who knows, maybe someone, somewhere in the world, will read your comment and find the strength to let go too. Your comment could be the encouragement someone needs today. Your shared pain can heal another silent soul. Don't underestimate the impact of being vulnerable before God and before people. This is how emotional chains are broken. Take a deep breath. Feel this presence. Imagine placing this invisible weight, this anxiety, this guilt, this fear in the hands of Jesus. And hear him lovingly and firmly saying, "I will give you rest." It's not maybe. It's not one day. It's a promise. And it's for you. But that's not all. Something even deeper is about to be revealed. Because sometimes anxiety doesn't come from what you carry, but from what you do to avoid feeling it. And emotional activism can be just as destructive as silence. What happens next will show you the hidden side of unbridled productivity and how it has been used as spiritual anesthesia by thousands of people. What if I told you that anxiety often reveals itself not only in distressing silence, but also in the incessant rush, that it doesn't always hide behind visible tears, but behind busy schedules, endless checklists, and commitments that never cease? Jesus reveals to you that there is a type of camouflaged anxiety that dresses up as productivity, but screams inside, and the story you're going to hear now will expose something that few have the courage to admit, that doing too much is sometimes the most subtle way of running away from yourself. Imagine a man waking up before sunrise. He organizes everything, plans everything, runs everything, and yet when you go to bed, you feel like you are failing, that you owe, that he didn't do enough, that if it stops, everything collapses. That man could be any of us. But today, he has a name, Jonas. Yes, that same Jonah that everyone knows for the great storm and the fish. But what few realize is that his emotional storm began long before the physical waves rose. It began the moment he used activity as a spiritual disguise. The text says, Jonah rose up to flee from the presence of the Lord, Jonah 1:3. It wasn't a fall. It was a race. It was not a visible collapse. It was a strategic escape. Jonas was being called to face something within himself, the pain of obeying, the weight of forgiving, the tension of confronting a difficult people. But instead of facing it, he activated the mode that many of us know well, that of constant occupation. Instead of saying, "Lord, I'm afraid," he said, "I'm going to do something else." Instead of exposing himself in vulnerability, he hid in movement. And this escape seemed so rational. After all, he was moving, right? Buying tickets, boarding, continuing the journey, but there was something invisible in that movement, an absence of peace. Because not all productivity comes on purpose. Some are born out of panic, trying to silence anxiety with noise, to suppress pain with tasks, of replacing prayer with performance. How many of us are like Jonah, not literally fleeing to Tarshish, but immersed in projects, lists, commitments, and performance, just to not face the silence, just so you don't hear the scary question, "What's happening inside me?" Jesus reveals to you that this type of activism is treacherous, because applauded on the outside, but devastating on the inside. How many are drowning in tasks because they feel that if they stop, they will have to deal with emptiness, with the pain of the past, scared of the future, with the guilt that still burns? Have you ever felt this way? As if it were safer to keep running than to stop and look inside? Have you ever wondered why you are so afraid of resting? The Bible shows that Jonah went down in a ship, literally, but also spiritually. He moved away layer by layer from the presence that could heal him, until he was swallowed, not only by a large fish, but by the anguish of his own soul. And this is where the hidden wow comes in. The storm that overtook him was not punishment, it was mercy. Because God knew that if Jonah kept running away busy, he would die empty. Then he sent the wind, the sea, the confrontation, not to punish, but to stop the escape. Maybe your life is in the middle of a storm right now, not because God has abandoned you, but because he loves you too much to let you run away. Jesus is saying today, stop running away from productivity. I want your presence, not your performance. He sees you beyond what you do. He knows what you avoid feeling, and he loves you, even there. If this message is exposing an invisible leak in your life, leave a surrender sign in the comments. Write, "Jesus, I don't want to run away anymore," because admitting to escaping is the first step back to peace. And your comment, no matter how simple it may seem, could be the touch that wakes up someone else. Someone may be experiencing exactly this struggle and will find courage in your words. Close your eyes for a moment and visualize Jesus in the midst of the storm, reaching out his hand, Not to tell you to do more, but to say, come back, rest. I didn't call you to run aimlessly, I called you to walk with me. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this truth. You don't need to keep numbing your soul with tasks. And here's the twist that could change everything. Jesus isn't just calling you to stop. He's inviting you to start listening again. Because when Jonah finally fell silent in the belly of the fish, it was there, deep down, that he prayed sincerely. Sometimes God allows rock bottom, because it's the only place where the noise of productivity stops, and the soul finally listens. But what you are about to hear now will touch on an even deeper point of anxiety, when faith, even alive, seems unable to free you, when believing is no longer enough, and you feel guilty for still being afraid. The next moment of this journey will reveal to you that even those who walked with Jesus very closely faced intense doubts, and there is something sacred about this that almost no one tells. There is a pain that eats away inside even when everything seems spiritually aligned. It's that silent, almost secret feeling of doing everything right, praying, reading the Bible, going to church, but still feeling a gut-wrenching emptiness in your chest. The next moment on this journey reveals a truth that few have the courage to confess, and that can completely transform the way you view your faith and your anxiety. The walls were locked, the disciples hid. Fear pulsed in every corner of the house, like an echo of the death they had witnessed. Jesus had been crucified, and even the words of resurrection seemed too distant to comfort. The trauma of loss was mixed with the confusion of faith, and it was in this scenario that an absence stood out. Thomas was not there when Jesus first appeared. When the others told him, his eyes were not filled with hope, but with pain, and the phrase that came out of his mouth was not one of defiant incredulity, but of a wounded soul. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe. How many times have you felt this way? Knowing the promises, hearing the testimonies, but inside, bleeding, as if your faith wasn't enough to contain the avalanche of anxiety that doesn't stop, as if you were a walking spiritual error for not being able to feel at peace, even though you believe. And this is where Jesus reveals something powerful to you. Faith and anxiety are not opposites that exclude each other. They often live together in the same soul. Thomas did not doubt out of arrogance. He doubted because he had loved deeply, and whoever truly loves, when they lose, they are irreparably broken. He had given himself to an ideal, to a master, to a promise, and he saw it all hung on a cross. It's easy to judge when you're not in the place of pain, but Jesus doesn't judge. He enters the closed space, passes through walls, ignores emotional blocks, and gently extends his hand. High five, Tomei. This is the touch that heals wounded faith, the touch that Jesus offers you today, because he knows your insides. He saw when you prayed for help and still went to sleep with a racing heart. He listened to their songs of worship, even as his mind was invaded by thoughts of fear. He doesn't abandon you because you feel anxious. He gets closer for exactly that reason. And when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed," he is not diminishing Thomas. He is opening the door for me and you, for all of us who did not see with our eyes, but still chose to believe, even with tremors, even with doubts, even with crises. Because true faith is not the absence of anxiety. It is the courageous act of continuing even when feeling afraid. Have you ever found yourself thinking that your faith was weak because you still do? That maybe God is disappointed in you because despite your prayers, your anxious thoughts won't stop? Jesus reveals to you, the faith that he seeks is not that which never wavers, but that which seeks him even in the midst of internal chaos. Thomas touched Jesus, but before that, you were touched by him. And perhaps today, you need that same touch, not to prove something to others, but to quiet your heart. Because sometimes, what despairs the soul most is this unspoken question: does Jesus understand me? Does he see the confusion inside me? And the answer, through this story, is a divine whisper. Yes, I see. And I do not turn away because of it. I draw near. If this word touched you at some deep point in your journey, write in the comments, "Jesus, touch my doubts," not as a cry of defeat, but as an act of spiritual courage. Your comment could be a silent hug for someone who feels the same way but never had the courage to say it out loud, and now, get ready. Because the next truth that Jesus reveals to you will touch on something even deeper, your identity. Because anxiety, when left untreated, not only disturbs the soul, it begins to rewrite the way you see yourself. And what comes next could forever change the way you look at yourself. But what happens when anxiety not only weakens us, but completely robs us of who we are? When she doesn't scream, but whispers lies disguised as identity. What if the root of your suffering is not just in racing thoughts or fear of the future, but in the way you see yourself? Get ready. What you hear now will change the way you see yourself. Imagine yourself hiding, in silence, inside a wine press. Your hands shake as you knit wheat in a place that was never meant for it. It's dark, silent, and all you feel is shame and fear. Not because you're running away from something external, but because you feel like you're not enough. That was Gideon, a young man tormented by a silent anxiety which did not scream but gnawed. He was not the strongest in his house. He was not the most respected in his tribe, and he didn't even believe that God still saw him. The people of Israel were oppressed by Midianites, but Gideon was oppressed by something even crueler: doubt about who he was. Anxiety, when not treated in the light of the Word, becomes a distorted lens that alters the way we see ourselves, and that destroys you from the inside. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he did not tell him, "You need to improve," or "Stop being fearful." He looked into the heart of someone broken and declared, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." Jesus reveals to you today, God does not speak to who you think you are. He speaks to who he knows you were born to be. But how many times have you hidden like Gideon? How many times have you looked in the mirror and seen no value? When anxiety takes over, it whispers, "You're not enough. You never will be." And the more you believe this lie, the more you build your identity on something fragile, unstable, and false. Gideon responded to the angel with a speech full of inferiority. "Ah, my Lord, with what shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is the poorest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house." Judges 6:15. He defined himself by his social position, by comparison with others, by family limitations. Have you ever noticed how anxiety forces us to see everything from a lack? She blocks any trace of courage with layers upon layers of insecurity. But what if I told you that what you were taught about identity is incomplete? Anxiety tells you, you are what you feel. But Jesus reveals to you, you are what I declared about you, even when you don't feel it. God did not deny Gideon's fears, but called him by what he saw in him. This is liberating, because healing doesn't come when you feel strong enough. Healing comes when you allow yourself to be seen by God as he truly sees you. Jesus doesn't wait for you to improve before loving you. He loves you exactly at the moment when you are hiding in your own press, trying to survive emotionally. The anxiety that arises from a broken identity is one of the most difficult to recognize because it disguises itself as humility, prudence, logic. But deep down, it is paralyzing. It prevents you from responding to God's calling because you believe you don't have what it takes. And that is why the verse, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor," needs to be more than a memorized text. It needs to be a scream inside you. A break with everything that was built on rejection, abandonment, comparison, and humiliation. How many voices echo inside you, telling you that you will never be enough? How many times have you tried to adapt to what others expected? Suffocating. Your essence? Gideon was also in this toxic cycle until a word from God broke that pattern. This is exactly what the Holy Spirit is doing with you now. Anxiety doesn't just stifle your present, it steals your future, because it undermines the root of who you are. But Jesus came to restore that. And from the moment you start to believe what he says about you, and not what your anxiety says, you begin to truly be free. This freedom is not immediate, but it is progressive. Gideon still doubted, still asked for signs, still stumbled. But every step he took was a response to a God who never stopped calling him for who he was: brave, And that's what God is doing with you today. He is calling you for what He has placed within you, even if it is buried behind traumas, disappointments, and panic attacks. Anxiety wants to convince you that you are too weak, too broken, too insecure. But God reveals to you that you were chosen, even with fear, even with failures, even with tears. Because the strength that will sustain you does not come from you. It comes from Him. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Imagine Jesus looking at you with compassion and saying, "You are not what anxiety says. You are mine. I call you strong even when you feel weak." Let this truth invade the spaces of your soul that you have hidden for so long. And if that word touched a wound that you couldn't name, write in the comments right now, "Jesus reminds me of who I am." Your statement could be just what someone else needs to get up today. And here comes something even deeper. Because if anxiety can steal your identity, it can also have a spiritual root much older than you realize. Get ready. What you're about to discover will touch layers of your soul that you didn't even know were still hurt. But what if what you're feeling hasn't started now? What if the anxiety that holds you back today is rooted in something deeper, something spiritual, ancestral, invisible, but real? There is a story that exposes the beginning of the separation between man and God, and with it, the birth of fear. And what you're about to hear will change the way you understand the origins of your emotional pain. It was late afternoon. The trees swayed under the breath of the Creator. The sound of God's footsteps walking in the garden was already familiar to Adam. But that day, the sound provoked a reaction that had never happened before: fear. For the first time, man hid from the Father, not because God had changed, but because something inside him had been broken. "I heard your footsteps in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked." Genesis 3:10. Adam's response echoes to this day in so many anxious hearts. I was scared. I hid. I felt exposed, vulnerable, insufficient. The anxiety, deep down, was born there. When the connection between creature and creator was broken, the human heart began to seek within itself the security that only God could offer. And the result was this toxic cycle that consumes entire generations. The spiritual root of anxiety is not just in the events we experience or the words we hear, but in the emptiness that the absence of God's presence generates within the soul. Since Eden, we have carried this invisible inheritance, the desperate desire to control everything, to avoid pain, to escape vulnerability, because something back there told us that we are now on our own. But Jesus reveals to you that this is a lie, one of the oldest. The anxiety that takes over your mind, that accelerates your heart and freezes your courage, is often born from the false belief that you are alone, that you have to carry everything, solve everything, support everything, and that's too heavy for anyone. Maybe you've never associated your anxiety with spiritual distance. Maybe you always believed it was just an emotional, psychological issue. But what if they revealed to you that the emptiness you feel is the absence of intimacy with God? Adam was not anxious before the fall. He was naked and at peace. Only after moving away from the Father's voice did shame enter. Insecurity took place. Fear took root. Have you ever felt this way? Naked in front of life? Afraid of what others will see if they really look at you? If they know who you are inside? This constant restlessness may have more to do with your soul crying out for reconnection than with your external environment. Many try to fill this hole with distractions, relationships, achievements. But none of these things touch the place where spiritual anxiety hides. Because only Jesus can enter there. Only He has the power to restore the lost garden. Jesus reveals to you that there is no shame in being afraid. The shame is in remaining, hidden when He is calling you back. He calls you by name, even though He knows your fall. He still walks through your garden, looking for you. There is a powerful secret hidden in this narrative. The question God asked Adam, "Where are you?" was not geographic. It was spiritual. It was emotional. It was intimate. And perhaps that is the question that echoes over your life now. Where are you? Where is your heart? Where did your peace go? Where is your confidence? Anxiety may have taken you so far away from yourself that you no longer know how to respond. But today, Jesus doesn't just ask, he comes to meet you. And when he arrives, he does not bring condemnation, bring cover. God himself made clothes to cover Adam's shame. It was the first expression of grace, right there, at the root of the fall. And today, he does the same with you. Cover your fear with love. Cover your anxiety with presence. Cover your shame with identity. You are no longer naked in front of the world. You are clothed with the grace of a God who does not reject you because of your crisis, but draws near because of it. Anxiety no longer has power over you when you see yourself again through the eyes of those who created you. When your identity is once again established not in what you feel, but in what he says about you. And what he says is, you are mine, you are loved, I see you, I am with you. There is no human technique capable of curing anxiety that was born from spiritual separation. Only reconnection with the Creator can break this cycle. Only Jesus can restore what was broken in Eden, and that restoration begins now. Not when everything gets better, not when life is in order, but right here, in the chaos, in the fear, in the hiding place you put yourself in. Jesus is not asking you to get out of the emotional bush where you hid. He is getting in there with you, calling your name. And maybe this video is his voice echoing over you today, bringing to light truths that were buried under the noise of anxiety. You don't need to run away anymore. You don't need to hide anymore. You no longer have to try to control everything. There is spiritual rest waiting for you, and it starts with one step. Stop running away and start listening. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this presence. She is real, and it's catching up with you now. If this word awakened something deep in you, write in the comments, Jesus calls me by name. Because perhaps, by declaring this, you are spiritually returning to the garden and listening again to the voice that can silence all your fears. But that's still not all. Because even after restoring identity, we still face moments when everything seems to spiral out of control. And what you're about to hear will defy the logic of your anxiety. Because there is someone who faced chaos and found peace, even amid the chains of prison. What if the true cure for anxiety lies not in finding order in your circumstances, but in learning to remain whole, even when everything around you falls apart? What you're about to discover will change the way you understand peace and where it truly lives. The prison was not just made of iron. It was one of silence, of forgetfulness, of abandonment. Paulo was there, locked away from the world, without any certainty of when or if he would come out. The cold walls echoed the loneliness of someone who had done so much for the kingdom and now barely had the freedom to move. But even so, it was there that he wrote one of the most shocking and liberating sentences in the entire Bible. I learned to be content in any and all situations. Phil 4:11. How is this possible? How does one find peace in an environment that inspires despair? The answer lies not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of something, or rather, someone, that is not shaken by external storm. Jesus reveals to you, through Paul's testimony, that the peace you seek so much is not outside, but within. And it starts when you understand that you don't need everything to be right to be at peace. Have you ever had days when everything seemed out of place? The clock ticks, thoughts scream, pressure increases, and your heart finds no rest. Everything feels out of place. Relationships, work, finances, health, yourself. And anxiety grows because you feel like you've lost control. But what this story shows us is something that goes against common thinking. Perhaps it is exactly when you lose control that you finally make space for God to act. Paul was not in control, but he was at peace, because he did not depend on circumstances, but on an eternal truth. God was with him, even in prison, and that was enough. How many times do we fool ourselves into thinking that peace is the result of an organized life? We think, when I solve this, then I'll be able to rest. But this conditional peace is fragile. It breaks at the slightest sign of change. What Paul learned was unconditional contentment. a tranquility that is not sold on the shelves of the world, but is cultivated in intimacy with Christ. He learned, and this is crucial, to live contentedly. This means he went through a process. There were days when I didn't know how to bear it. There were moments of anguish, but through it all, he was shaped by God to find rest even when everything around him said otherwise. Jesus reveals to you that the anxiety you feel does not need to dominate your soul. No matter how out of place everything seems, there is a place inside you that can remain strong. This place is where the Spirit of God dwells. When you ground yourself in this presence, the storms will still come, but you will not be swept away by them. It's as if God placed a weight of glory inside you that keeps you grounded, even when the winds try to drag you away. Take a deep breath now. Imagine Paul, alone, writing with his hands marked, his body tired, but his spirit at peace. He discovered the secret that so many look for in books, in therapies, in distractions. Contentment is not the absence of struggle, it is the presence of trust. It's knowing that even when everything is out of place, God is still on the throne. And if He's on the throne, then your heart can rest. This message is for you who have been trying to keep everything under control. For those of you who blame yourself for not being able to hold everything together. For you who are tired of pretending that everything is fine. Today, Jesus reveals to you that you no longer need to pretend to be strong. You just need to learn to trust. Not in the promises of the world, but in the faithfulness of Him who has already overcome the world. Paul did not leave prison to have peace. He had peace to endure imprisonment. And that peace, that trust, that rest is also available to you now. If this word spoke to your heart, comment now. Jesus, teach me to live contentedly. This could be the seed of peace that will blossom in the midst of your chaos. What if I told you that the greatest enemy of your peace is not around you, but in the invisible regions of the soul? There is a spiritual battle going on right now, and now it will be revealed how Jesus equips you to win it. What if the anxiety that consumes you is not just an emotional imbalance, but a reflection of a much larger war, fought in a field that the eyes cannot see, but that the soul feels intensely? What you're about to discover will change the way you view your pain and reveal why praying is more urgent than running away. Everything seemed calm on the outside, but inside, a hurricane was raging. He couldn't name what he felt. Fear, pressure, exhaustion. It was as if the soul was at war, but there was no battlefield, just a weight, an inexplicable restlessness that pushed him to the brink of collapse. How many times have you felt this? An anxiety that appears out of nowhere, without logical explanation, and even when everything is apparently fine, the mind screams, the heart races, the body shakes. Jesus reveals to you that many times what we feel in the natural is a reflection of what is happening in the spiritual. In Ephesians 6:12, the Apostle Paul hands us a key that changes everything. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. This truth is shocking, because it shows us that what seems like an emotional breakdown is often the side effect of an invisible battle. And this battle has a clear target: your mind, your peace, your faith. Have you ever noticed how anxiety has the power to deconstruct your identity in Christ? She makes you doubt. It makes you forget who you are. It makes it seem like God is far away, when, in fact, that's when He's closest. Because when the spiritual field shakes, it is a sign that the sky is in movement. And the enemy knows this. He knows your weaknesses. He doesn't need to knock you down with big attacks, just whisper doubts in moments of silence. This is why the spiritual armor described in Ephesians 6 is not optional. It is a daily necessity. Gird yourselves with the truth. Take up the shield of faith and the sword of the Spirit. Anxiety is like a fiery dart, constantly thrown at your soul. And without spiritual protection, you are vulnerable to every lie the enemy tries to implant. You'll never get out of this. God doesn't hear your prayers. You are too weak. But these voices are not yours. They are imposters. And they will only be silent when you stand up, spiritually armed, and declare, He that is in me is greater than he that is in the world. 1 John 4:4. Jesus reveals to you that you are not collapsing. You are in combat, and that's why praying goes beyond asking for blessings. It's entering the battlefield with awareness of who you are in Christ. Prayer strengthens your spirit, clears your mind, and silences the lies that fuel your anxiety. This is why you often feel better after praying, even though the circumstances are still the same, because you change inside. And when your interior aligns with heaven, hell loses strength. You may have never heard this before, but you need to know. Anxiety can also be a symptom of a spiritual attack, especially when it comes for no reason, no trigger, no explanation. And in these moments, instead of blaming yourself or seeking escape through distractions, Jesus invites you to arm yourself, not with human strength, but with faith, with the Word, with adoration, with the presence of God that breaks invisible chains, because there is a place the enemy cannot touch, and that place is the center of God's will. The closer you are to this place, the more armored you will be against invisible attacks. But make no mistake, this is not about living without struggles. It's about knowing who fights with you and who fights for you. Jesus never promised no battles, but he guaranteed constant presence. He said, "In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." John 16:33. If he overcame and he dwells in you, then you can win too. Not because he is strong, but because he is clothed in heavenly armor. Take a deep breath and reflect. Is what you are feeling today just anxiety? Or is it an alarm from heaven calling you to spiritual warfare that you haven't noticed yet? Do not ignore this call. Get dressed, get up, pray like someone who knows that the soul needs protection, and declare that you will no longer live hostage to the invisible. You will live guided by the Spirit. If this message spoke to your heart, comment now. Jesus, strengthen me for this invisible war. May this be the beginning of your liberation. You are not alone. This battle is not just fought in the spiritual shadows. There is another type of war that silently steals your peace. A war fought on screens, in comparisons, in metrics of value that do not come from God. And what you're about to discover will challenge everything you believed about yourself. Not all enemies of your peace are invisible. Some use familiar faces, perfect feeds, and the illusion of a life you would like to have. Anxiety is not always born from trauma. Sometimes, it starts with a silent comparison, and what you are about to discover will shake the way you have seen yourself until today. Pedro had just experienced one of the most embarrassing and transformative moments of his life. He had denied Jesus 3 times. He cried bitterly, carried guilt. He felt unworthy. But there by the sea, Jesus calls him to a conversation that would change everything. Instead of condemning him, Jesus restores him. 3 times he asks, "Do you love me?" And he commissions him 3 times. "Feed my sheep." It was the fresh start, reconnecting with the calling, grace overcoming shame. But the next moment, upon seeing John coming after them, Peter asks, "What about him, Lord?" And it is here that Jesus releases a phrase that echoes to this day in hearts drowned in anxiety. "What do you care? You follow me." This answer was not harsh. It was liberating, because it shows that Jesus doesn't expect you to compare your spiritual walk to someone else's, nor his speed, not even your kind of pain, nor your healing rate. Jesus does not measure you by what others are experiencing. He looks at your heart, for your story, for what he himself planted in you. But the truth is that comparison has been a modern prison. Social networks create polished windows, but hide broken backstage. Anxiety arises when you look at someone else's stage and forget that you are behind the scenes of your own journey. And it's cruel, because comparison doesn't just steal your peace. It sabotages your identity. It always makes you feel late, insufficient, too small. And this constant pressure creates a cycle of frustration that traps your soul in a state of continuous anxiety. Jesus reveals to you that you were not created to follow someone else's path. Its route has a unique design. Your time is different. Your process too. As you compare yourself, You disconnect from the voice that matters most, that of Jesus telling you, "Follow me." The focus needs to return to Him, not on other people's success, not for the number of likes, not for the apparent perfection of the other. Eyes on Jesus, heart aligned with heaven. Only then can you break this cycle of anxiety that makes you feel less. Comparison is treacherous because it seems harmless. It starts with a thought, "Why haven't I achieved this yet?" Then comes another, "What am I doing wrong?" Then the identity begins to erode, and anxiety sets in. But what if I told you that your value is not in achieving more? It's recognizing who you are in God. It's not the feed that defines you. It is the Father. It is not comparison that leads you. It is the Spirit. Maybe you've lived for years chasing patterns that weren't created for you, trying to fit into models that stifle your authenticity. And that's tiring. This makes you sick. This steals peace. But today, Jesus whispers, "Follow me." Don't follow the pressure. Don't follow other people's expectations. Don't go with the flow. Follow the voice, because therein lies your direction, your peace, your rest. If this word is freeing you from an invisible weight, write in the comments, "Jesus, help me stop comparing myself." Your testimony could be the turning point in the lives of those who are drowning in the same internal demands. But comparison is not the only trap. There is a silent anxiety that arises when you feel like you are not capable of fulfilling what God has called you to do. And what comes next could transform your insecurity into supernatural courage. What if what is paralyzing your purpose is not the size of the challenge, but rather the way you see yourself facing it? There is a story in the Bible that will change the way you understand fear and anxiety in the face of your calling. Get ready, because what you are about to hear will expose a truth hidden in the hearts of many. Anxiety may be preventing you from living the most powerful plan that God designed for you. The flame burned, but did not consume the bush. A vision that broke logic. Moses, with his bare feet and racing heart, was faced with the inexplicable. But still, the biggest fire wasn't in the bush. It was burning inside. It was fear, the insecurity, the doubt, the anxiety of not being enough. When God called him to free the people, his response was not, "Here I am," with courage, but a question that echoes to this day in wounded souls. "Who am I to go?" Exodus 3:11. This phrase, spoken in the desert by a man who was running from the past, still echoes in the hearts of those who fear the future. Moses wasn't just a shepherd at that moment. He was someone with a heart crushed by guilt, by fear, by the feeling of being incapable. The anxiety that paralyzes begins exactly there, when we believe that our value comes from performance, capacity, perfection. And we forget that God's calling is not a requirement, it is a revelation. It's not about who you think you are. It's about who God knows you to be. Moses had every human reason to hesitate. He stuttered. He had fled Egypt. He carried a bloody past and a voiceless present. But God wasn't looking for perfection. He was kindling a mission in a broken heart. The problem is that we often confuse insecurity with spiritual prudence. But the truth is that the anxiety of, "What if I fail?" has stifled more dreams than any mistake ever made. How many times have you stopped acting because you thought you weren't good enough? How many promises have you postponed because fear screamed louder than faith? Jesus reveals to you, anxiety is not just a feeling, it can become a spiritual prison, an invisible cell where the enemy whispers that you will never be able to. And with each, "I'm not good enough, I'm not ready, I don't have what it takes," God's purpose is being suffocated by a fear that isn't even yours, but was planted perhaps in childhood, in comparisons, in traumas, in past failures. But here's the revelation. God never called the prepared. He prepares those he calls. God did not remove Moses' stutter, but he put eternal words in his mouth. God did not erase your past, but it redirected its future. Anxiety tries to convince you that your calling depends on your performance. But the truth is that it only depends on obedience. And here is the most impressive part of this story. Even after the encounter with God, even after the sign of the bush, even after the promises, Moses still hesitated. He asked God to send another, and God was angry, not because Moses was weak, but because when you refuse to believe what God says about you, you are calling the Creator a liar. How many times has God shown you signs? Have you used people to remind you who you are in Him? Has He given you words, promises, open doors? And still, you get stuck? Moses' anxiety was not a lack of information. It was an excess of introspection. When you look inward too much, you start to see only your limitations. But when you look up, you begin to hear a voice that says, I will be with you. Because God's calling does not come with the weight of proving oneself, but with the lightness of trusting. Jesus reveals to you that your purpose will not be fulfilled by the absence of anxiety, but by the presence of grace. Yes, maybe you still feel afraid. Maybe your voice still shakes. But the same God who used an old stick in the hand of an insecure man to part a sea can use your weaknesses to manifest a power that goes beyond logic. You don't need to be in control to fulfill your calling. You need to be willing, and that's enough. Because what paralyzes the purpose is not the lack of gifts, it is the lack of courage to believe that God really chose you. Then close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Imagine Jesus placing His hands on your shoulders and saying, I know who you are, and that's exactly why I chose you. This phrase can cure decades of insecurity, of comparisons, of spiritual paralysis. It's time to silence the voices of anxiety that say, you can't, and listen to the whisper of eternal truth. I will be with you. Exodus 3:12. There is no anxiety that can resist the weight of God's presence. There is no trauma that God cannot redeem. There is no past that invalidates a future designed by heaven. The mission you fear is exactly the place where God will reveal how much He trusts you, even when you still don't trust yourself. If this word touched wounds that you never had the courage to expose, write in the comments, I believe in the purpose that God gave me. Maybe your comment will be the breath of courage that another heart needs to move forward, but that's not all. What if I told you that there was an even more subtle way in which anxiety steals your peace? It's not screaming, it's not through explicit fear, it's whispering. While you're scrolling your phone screen, what you are about to hear will show you how silent comparison has destroyed entire lives without them even realizing it. Get ready, because what comes next will reveal an invisible trap, and how Jesus wants to free you from it. But before you can experience a true fresh start, there is a silent issue that needs to be faced. Something that you may have never related to anxiety, but that is eroding your peace from within. Soul exhaustion. Yes, that invisible exhaustion that you try to hide by smiling, working harder, or simply distracting yourself. But Jesus reveals to you that the rest you seek so much is not physical, it's spiritual. And what you're about to discover will show you that the place where your soul finds relief is no place at all. It's a person. There are nights when the bed becomes a prison. The body rests, but the mind does not stop. The eyes close, but the heart continues to scream. You roll from side to side, trying to escape a restlessness that has no name, an anxiety that is not shouted, but carried, a tiredness that does not come from work, but from the soul. It's as if life has become an eternal search for rest, but rest never comes. And then you start to get used to this inner turmoil. You learn to smile automatically, to respond, I'm fine, even when everything inside you is about to explode. And in this silent cycle, anxiety robs you, first of lightness, then of joy, finally of peace. But there is a psalm, perhaps the best known in the entire Bible, that is not just poetry, it is a promise. David did not write Psalm 23 in a calm time. He wrote amid threats, persecution, losses, and yet his soul found a resting place. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me by the waters of rest. Psalm 23:2. David was not talking about a geographic place. I was talking about a spiritual state, and that changes everything. Because true peace does not depend on external circumstances. It depends on who guides you from within. Jesus reveals to you, the reason why your peace is always slipping through your hands is not a lack of control. It is an excess of human attempts to maintain that control. Anxiety sets in when you take on the role of shepherd, but forget that you are the sheep. When you try to guide your life, your decisions, your fears, and carry everything alone, but the burden of being your own savior is too heavy, and Jesus knew this. That is why he introduced himself as the Good Shepherd, the one who knows each of your pains. What you see when you force a smile in the midst of exhaustion, who knows exactly what thought is consuming you right now, and who still invites you to rest. There is a depth to this psalm that only those who have been to the valley understand. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23:4. It's not about not passing through the valley. It's about knowing who you cross the valley with. You may be surrounded by doubts, fears, attacks, but if you are with him, there is rest. Not because the world has calmed down, but because your soul has found a safe place. And that is the peace that anxiety hates, because it doesn't get shaken. By bad news, it doesn't change with sudden changes. It doesn't collapse with external instability. It is a peace that passes understanding, because it comes from a presence. And here comes the turning point. Perhaps what no one has ever told you is that rest is not the absence of tasks. It is the presence of trust. It's not running away from pain. It's staying in faith. It's not about stopping doing it. It's about starting to trust. Jesus did not promise the absence of afflictions. He promised presence in the midst of them. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. John 16:33. And if he won and he is with you, then you will win too. The tiredness that exhausts you today is not definitive. It's a sign that your soul needs to stop fighting alone. You need to be led, not just relieved. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and imagine Jesus leading you now. He doesn't scream, he guides, he doesn't impose, he invites, he doesn't charge, he takes care. And even if everything around you seems hectic, a green pasture can be born within you. A place of peace in the midst of chaos, a soft voice amidst the noise, one certainty: you are not alone. The tiredness you feel is not failure. It is just your soul's cry for a shepherd, and he is here, calling you by name, not to charge you, but to guide you. If this word spoke to your quietest pains, write in the comments, "Lord, guide my soul to rest." It may be exactly this prayer that someone needs to say with you today. Your comment is a bridge of peace. If this message touched your heart, press the like button so that others can also be blessed. Your click could be the sign of hope that someone so desperately needs to find. But what if the end of your anxiety is not the end of your story, but the beginning of something much bigger? Because what comes next no longer talks about pain or fear. It talks about mission. There is a calling that arises exactly in the place of your greatest crisis. And what you're about to hear will reveal how Jesus turns his greatest failures into his most powerful purpose. What if everything that hurt you, stopped you, and consumed you emotionally was exactly the point where God wants to start something new? What if the fresh start you were looking for wasn't in a different place, but right in the middle of the pain you tried to forget? What you're about to discover will change the way you see everything. Imagine the sound of a rooster crowing echoing in your mind as a reminder of failure. Every time you try to get up, this sound pulls you back as if shouting, "You are not worthy." That's how Pedro felt. The same Peter who walked on the water, who promised never to abandon Jesus, was now on the margins of his own faith, consumed by silent guilt. He denied Jesus 3 times, and with each denial, something inside him broke. Anxiety set in not like a passing wind, but like a permanent weight. How to continue after failing the one you loved most. How to face life when you feel like you have betrayed your own hope. That morning on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, the atmosphere seemed familiar, but the mood was different. Peter goes back to doing what he did before he met Jesus, fishing. But it is there, precisely in this return to the past, that something extraordinary happens. Jesus appears, not with conviction, not with accusations, but with a question that tears the soul. "Pedro, do you love me?" 3 times Jesus asks, one for each denial. And with each response from Pedro, the weight of guilt begins to fall. Jesus doesn't just forgive, he commissions. Feed my sheep. It's as if Jesus said, I still see you as capable. There is still purpose in you. And this is the revelation that Jesus reveals to you today. The anxiety that is born from guilt, self-deprecation, and shame has no authority over what God still wants to do in your life. It's not your mistake that defines your destiny. It's the restoring love of Christ. When anxiety says, you don't deserve another chance, Jesus says, feed my sheep. In other words, I give you not just a new chance, I give you a new mission. There is something extremely healing about this moment. It's not just forgiveness. It's starting over with purpose. It is the gospel incarnate, in its most human and divine form. How many times have you felt like Pedro, carrying the weight of the past, trying to hide failures with productivity or isolation, hearing echoes of your failure repeating, you are no longer useful. But Jesus doesn't look for perfection. He looks for willing hearts. What you see as the end, he sees as the starting point. And it is exactly at this point that the cycle of toxic anxiety is broken. Because when you understand that you don't need to be perfect to be loved, nor impeccable to be chosen, you free yourself from the fear of making mistakes. Anxiety loses its strength when the love of Jesus enters with force. Peter was not only restored, he became the rock upon which Jesus would build his church. Does this seem contradictory to you? Perhaps in human eyes, but that's the beauty of grace. It doesn't choose us despite our flaws, but often because of them. Because that is where God's glory shines brightest. Jesus reveals to you that the fresh start you need is not when everything is perfect, but when you decide to believe that there is still something divine in you, even with the cracks. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine Jesus in front of you, looking at you with that same love that he looked at Peter. He doesn't have a finger pointed. He has his hands outstretched. And he says, do you love me? And upon hearing your yes, he responds with tenderness and firmness. Then go and feed, live, start over, because there is still purpose. Take a deep breath, allow yourself to feel this message. Your story does not end with your mistakes. It starts where you decide to let Jesus rewrite it. If this word touched you deeply, comment, I start over with Jesus. Your comment could be the healing bridge someone is hoping to find today. If this message touched your heart, press the like button so that others can also be blessed. Your click can be God's instrument to restore a life. And if this emotional journey took you to deep places in your soul, then something inside you has already started to heal. But there is still more, because when it comes to the love of Jesus, there is always more. Are you ready to live the freedom he promises you? If you've come this far, it's because something inside you is being deeply touched. Maybe a part of your soul that was already tired of trying to stay standing amidst the pressure, the noise of the mind, the pain that no one sees. Maybe you learned to smile on the outside, while everything inside screamed for help. And yet here you are, still watching, still breathing, still searching. This is no coincidence. That's an answer. Answer from a God who saw you in the darkness of the room, who heard you in the silence of your most broken prayers, and who now reaches you with something that does not come from me, nor from the video, but from him. Jesus reveals to you, with intensity, that this anxiety that imprisons you is not your identity. It's just a storm, and he, who has already calmed furious seas with a word, is ready to calm their interior. All these stories you heard, all these pains, falls, new beginnings, were seeds sown in your heart, and now they are sprouting. Because the toxic cycle of anxiety, the one that seemed impossible to break, is being confronted by something much more powerful, the living presence of Jesus. He didn't just come to ease your pain for a few minutes. He came to heal, restore, and rewrite your story. And that starts when you decide to give it all away. Don't leave, but everything, because Jesus only heals what you decide to expose. Maybe you feel a lump in your throat right now. Maybe the tears are falling without explanation. This is not weakness. It's healing happening. It is the Spirit of God reaching you where no human words could touch. Therefore, before we pray together, I want you to allow yourself something. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and say to yourself, even in the midst of chaos, Jesus is here, and He is. You didn't get here by willpower. It was His love that sustained you to this point. And now, it's about to lift you up like never before. Now, let's pray. But not as a formality at the end of the video. Let's pray as if we were before an invisible but real altar, where your soul is being touched by hands that don't hurt, but heal. Jesus, you know every pain of this person who is watching, every insomnia, every hidden panic attack, every fear of the future. You see beyond what it shows. Therefore, Father, now we surrender everything, all anxiety, every comparison, every feeling of insufficiency. Break, Lord, right now, every toxic cycle that has been holding this soul back. Free this heart from fear, doubt, shame. May this mind be covered with your peace, not the peace of the world, but the peace that passes all understanding. Holy Spirit, take this life in your arms now and seal this new beginning. May from now on, she lives no longer controlled by fear, but guided by your love, in the name of Jesus. Amen. If you've come this far, it's because God is working in your life. And don't think for a second that this ends now. No, in fact, it's just beginning. And what comes next could be even deeper. Because in the video that is now appearing on your screen, Jesus continues to reveal truths that will free areas of your soul that are still chained. Don't leave without watching. You need to see this. What you will find there could be the missing key, the answer you've been praying for, the beginning of your new story. Comment below, I made it to the end. This may seem simple, but your comment will show other people that it is possible to overcome anxiety with faith. It will serve as a testimony. It will be a sign. Share this video with someone you know is struggling, someone who may not even have the strength to ask for help, but who can find, through this word, the strength they need to keep going. And subscribe to the channel right now. Your registration is not just a click away, it's an act of faith. It's like saying, I want to keep being fed by this truth. What's more, by subscribing, you allow more people to receive this same hope. You bless others with a simple gesture of reciprocity. As it is written, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Jeremiah 29:11. What you experienced here today was just the beginning. Jesus is calling you for more. So go now to the next video. Because what comes next could be exactly what was needed for your complete liberation. See you there, and may the peace of Christ continue to guard you until you recognize yourself as being totally free.